The world is shifting. Global alliances are being tested, and nations everywhere are rethinking their place on the world stage. Canada is no exception. As a country, as people, and as a public service, we have faced pivotal moments in our history. From the Charlottetown negotiations to leading public service reform, Jocelyne Bourgon, then becoming clerk of the Privy Council, was a driving force in shaping key moments for both Canada and our public service. Her leadership extends beyond Canada's borders through her work with the OECD, CAPM, and the UN. Madame Bourgon has seen firsthand the global shifts that continue to shape our future. Her efforts on the New Synthesis project highlight the importance of learning not only from our own experiences, but from the lessons shared by others around the world. Once again, we are preparing to meet the challenges and changes ahead. The way forward will demand not only the wisdom of experience, but also a willingness to learn from those who have led through times of change. From past reforms to future innovations, the role of the public service remains a vital force in guiding Canada through uncertainty. Can ideas from the past help invent a better future? Welcome to Manion 2025.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Manion Lecture, Serving Canada in 2025. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Mon nom est Nathalie Laviadès-Jourdouin. Je suis vice-présidente principale à l'École de la fonction publique et je serai votre maître de cérémonie cet après-midi. I would like to acknowledge and respect the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation on whose unceded lands we gather. We honor the rich history, culture, and languages and recognize their continued connection as guardians of these lands and waters. Let us take a moment to appreciate the land, the people, and the history. We are grateful to live, work, and learn on this land, and we honor their enduring presence and stewardship. As we continue to acknowledge the importance of reconciliation, we are committed to building respectful, meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples and recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous communities. It is my great pleasure, once more, to welcome you all to this year's Manion Lecture, Serving Canada in 2025. Today's event will feature a presentation from our keynote speaker, the Honourable Jocelyne Bourgon, followed by a panel discussion with distinguished guests who will share their unique perspectives, especially as we delve into the challenges and opportunities of public service reform. I would also like to acknowledge the Manion family who can take pride in the legacy of John Lawrence Manion, the inaugural director of the Canadian Centre for Management Development, whose name is honored through this event. Depuis plus de 30 ans, la conférence Manion est l'un des événements annuels les plus distingués de l'école. Elle nous offre l'occasion d'échanger avec d'éminents conférenciers et conférencières d'horizons, professions et de points de vue divers. Elle offre aussi aux dirigeants de la fonction publique fédérale l'occasion d'être mis au défi par d'autres professionnels qui remettent en question le statu quo, s'interrogent sur l'avenir et, grâce à leurs perspectives, nous aident à élargir nos horizons. Notre conférencière principale de cet après-midi s'inscrit parfaitement dans la tradition des conférences Manion. However, before she takes the stage, I do have to admit that I've been holding on to a little secret. We actually have a very special guest who was eager to take part in today's event by helping us kick off this next moment. Someone near and dear to our keynote speaker's heart and someone who knows her in a truly unique and personal way. Please join me in welcoming to the stage her son, Francis Bilodeau, who is here to give a very special introduction.
Donc, bonjour à tous. Bonjour, maman. Pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, mon nom c'est Francis. Je suis sous-ministre associé au ministère de l'Innovation, de la Science et du Développement économique, ce qui n'a rien à voir avec ma raison d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je suis ici pour honorer et présenter ma mère, Jocelyne Bourgon, notre conférencière cette année du Manion Lecture. It is for me more than a privilege to introduce you today. More than anything, you have shared with me your love of the institutions, of the public service, and of the Canadians that we serve. You've always reminded me that the public service belongs to all Canadians. It's through the public service that we achieve our goals as a country and our collective objectives as a country. Strong public institutions matter, you've often told me, but they don't happen on their own. They happen thanks to people. Tous les gens qui sont dans cette salle, qui ont décidé de dédier leur carrière et leur vie professionnelle à la fonction publique, au pays, au Canada, à ses citoyens. Jocelyne, my mother, has undeniably left a strong legacy and helped shape the public service and, by extension, the country. But in my case, the journey's been a bit more personal. I can still remember trips fairly young, alors que ma mère était au ministère des Pêches et Océans, où elle m'amenait voir le travail qu'elle faisait. I remember drawing the Parliament from her office at PCO and looking out the window and drawing the Parliament. And I certainly have been shaped by the numerous discussions that my mother and my father had with me around what it means to be a public servant, around policy, and around what it means to be a Canadian. So for me, these have been experiences that have shaped me. Et aujourd'hui, maman, alors que tu continues tes réflexions sur la fonction publique, sur les institutions, sur la gouvernance, je suis heureux d'être capable de partager cette passion-là avec toi et de faire partie du cheminement. Donc, j'aimerais vous présenter à vous tous ma mère, the Honourable Jocelyne Bourgon, and this year's Manion Lecture. Thank you.
Whoa. Bring the Kleenex. Taki, il faut pas déstabiliser un conférencier juste avant de faire un discours. Pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, et vous êtes possiblement nombreux, je suis la mère de Francis Bilodeau. C'est très émouvant. Merci, Francis. Merci d'être là. C'est un immense plaisir d'avoir la chance de vous adresser la parole, apporter les Kleenex. Et c'est un honneur d'avoir la chance d'être conférencier à la conférence Manion, qui est un événement phare dans le calendrier des événements de l'École de la fonction publique sous la direction de Takis Aran-Takis. Alors, parlons administration publique. Last November, I gave a lecture in Singapore. Taki was there, in fact, about the challenges of serving in the second quarter of the 21st century. And I argued at the time that governments were facing a convergence of existential threats that are interacting with each other and therefore making the role of government ever more challenging. For instance, climate change is the existential threat that my generation was unable to address. The risk of pandemic is as high as ever. AI is coming of age, but also bioengineering and geoengineering, and with these technology, new risks and opportunities. So I proposed or suggested that serving in the second quarter of the 21st century is serving in a more dangerous world at a more challenging time. Now, that was only a few months ago, 6 months ago, but today I would add that serving in 2025 is serving in the midst of the most profound geopolitical realignment in our lifetime. When the future is uncertain, when the ideas and practices that have served us well in the past become unstuck and come undone, this is when the role of government is the most important and when the potential for innovation and invention is the greatest. The challenge for public sector leaders the world over is to ensure that their country will be among the few that will successfully navigate through an unprecedented period of change. And your challenge is to ensure that Canada will be among them. Honestly, you could not have chosen a better time to be in government. Welcome to serving in 2025. But to lead change in a challenging time, one needs an appreciation of the challenges at play. So what is Canada up against? I could have selected many dimensions. I've reduced the speech to only one, which is related to current events. So here is my short story of a short time in history. It was not until World War II that a consensus emerged that progress and peace could best be achieved through common norms, common rules, common institutions. The United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the World Trade Organization, to name a few, were born from the ashes of two world wars. And taken together, these conventions and institutions acted as a protective shield. Les gens de ma génération ont eu la chance de travailler sous ce dôme protecteur. Ce n'est pas votre cas. These measures never amounted really to an international system, and it was never universally accepted, but it was sufficiently broadly respected to influence the behavior of countries. Le principe d'intégrité territoriale a réduit les risques d'invasion. Un commerce mondial régi par des règles de droit a contribué à une longue période de prospérité tout en réduisant les risques de conflit. Et les pays comme le Canada, qui sont dotés d'un système de gouvernance qui allie démocratie, état de droit, économie de marché et filet de sécurité sociale, ont obtenu les meilleurs résultats comparativement à tous les autres régimes de gouvernance tout au long du XXe siècle. And today, this protective shield is breaking down. Trade liberalism is moving in reverse, and protectionism is on the rise. The system that operated over the last 80 years contributed to the longest period of growth and the longest period of peace in modern history. This is a remarkable achievement. The United States of America was the main architect, not the only one, but the main architect of this system. What is so remarkable about the events at play and recent changes is that the system is not falling apart because of its opponents, and there are opponents, the rise of authoritarian regime, illiberal states, and so on. It is falling apart because of the action of its main architect. This is quite remarkable. Europe is discovering that its dependence on the US is making it vulnerable, and that it may have to stand on its own and alone to defend Ukraine. This will have ripple effect around the world. Japan, South Korea, or Taiwan have no reason to believe in the US security guarantees. La position de Taïwan face à la Chine est considérablement diminuée et affaiblie. Les pays africains qui comptaient sur l'aide américaine devront se rapprocher de plus en plus de la Chine. This is a different world. The US administration has also initiated a pivot on trade. Canadians are very familiar with that. The administration is of the view that free trade under a system of international rules no longer serve its best interests. And under this new doctrine, access to the US market is a privilege that can be monetized. And Canada is discovering that its dependence on the American market can be weaponized. So the world has learned and will not forget that the USA is an unreliable partner, and it could even be a hostile partner when that serves its purpose. There will be many twists and turns and chaos and confusion over the coming months and coming years. There will be attempts to appease, attempts to cajole, in an effort to restore some degree of stability. But in the end, the world will get reconfigured, and Canada must be part of it. So what is Canada up against? Well, this is not a trade issue. This is not a short-term issue, and it is not an aberration. La tendance isolationniste américaine a pris forme sous des administrations antérieures et le protectionnisme continuera sous d'autres administrations. Alors, ce serait une grave erreur, une erreur colossale pour le Canada de tenter de gagner du temps en espérant que tout cela passera. Le Canada pourrait se retrouver plus isolé que nous ne le sommes aujourd'hui. So, the prudent course of action is to work with the US when this is mutually beneficial, work around it when it serves Canada's interests, and work with others to protect our sovereignty. Canada is already exposed to economic, political, psychological warfare. Canada is especially vulnerable to technological warfare, and the risk of mischief to undermine Canadian unity should not be underestimated. And that might be our greatest risk. So you are serving in a world of real politics, and in an asymmetrical relationship like the one between the US and Canada, the smaller player does not have the upper hand. It must be smarter, and it must play its own long game. But that Canada can do. La campagne électorale a été à plusieurs égards fascinante. Elle a révélé des consensus forts sur plusieurs fronts. La réduction des barrières interprovinciales, l'ouverture au marché mondial, la sécurité de l'Arctique. Le gouvernement du Canada, dans les prochaines semaines, les prochains mois, devra identifier les interventions clés qui aideront le Canada à reconquérir sa souveraineté économique. Vous serez aux premières loges des discussions avec les ministres, le gouvernement, le cabinet, qui mèneront à un premier discours du trône, un premier budget et tous les autres. But as you prepare for these discussions with your minister, keep in mind that the current circumstances offer an opportunity to accelerate changes that were needed in any event. Never let a crisis go to waste. There is an opportunity to address issues that we were unable to address. There is an opportunity to resolve issues that your predecessors could not resolve. So to be fair, not all was well in Canada just prior to the election of President Trump. For instance, Canadians like to think of Canada as a G7 country. And indeed, it was the 7th largest economy at the time of joining this forum in 1976. Today, it is 10th, has just been overtaken by South Korea. It is 19th in GDP per capita. It is 30th in purchasing power parity, and has been on a downward trend since the mid-1980s. Alors non, ce n'est pas un problème qui découle des actions du gouvernement des 10 dernières années. Ces problèmes ont eu une longue période d'incubation. Gardez à l'esprit également que ensuring Canada's future prosperity means generating products and services the world needs on terms the world is prepared to pay. It is generating higher value-added products and services the world would find hard to reproduce or to emulate. So the challenge is not to preserve what was there before, hoping that that too will disappear and we can go back to normal. There should be no return to a time when 75% of Canada's export were destined to a single market. This is a way of giving away our own sovereignty. So the challenge is to accelerate adaptation while avoiding measures that would delay inevitable and necessary adjustment. Gardez à l'esprit également que le Canada est en meilleure posture que ses pairs pour faire face aux circonstances présentes et investir dans son avenir. La dette du Canada s'élève à peu près 50% du PIB. Ce n'est pas la position la plus glorieuse, mais quand on se compare, on se console rapidement. Cela se compare à 92% pour la France, 100% pour le Royaume-Uni et 205% pour le Japon. Le Canada dispose de ressources naturelles, d'une diversité énergétique, de l'eau et de l'espace en abondance, de conditions climatiques favorables, d'une main-d'œuvre hautement qualifiée et de recherche de pointe. Canada, unlike other countries, has the capacity and the means for building a modern, technologically advanced, and green economy. So, a crisis, yes, but an occasion for course correction. Well, what about the public sector? Well, there again, I would say that not all was well in the public sector just prior to the election of President Trump. There were 7,000 public servants per million Canadians in 2000, but 9,000 in 2024. The number of executives has doubled or more than doubled over the same period of time. Now, I know there was a COVID crisis, but there are no sign that we're going back to a different ratio. That means that citizens are justified to ask probing questions about such rapid growth. The question they're asking is, what are they getting in return? Because from the outside looking in, this growth did not translate in better service to Canadians. Canadians have experienced some service breakdowns, long waiting time, system breakdowns. More puzzling is Canada was among the top 10 cleanest country in the world until 2019, and it is now 15. And corruption cases have eroded public confidence in the institution. One indicator that I find troubling is that Canada ranks 6th as in e-government and digital services in 2003. This is after an intense period of downsizing. And today, in spite of rapid growth, Canada ranks 47. So, a solid institution, but there are course corrections needed, and a crisis is a good time to rethink some of our practices. Sooner or later, the public service of Canada will be asked to reduce its footprint. But how that will be done will be of critical importance. It could propel the public service forward and prepare it for the future and bring the course corrections needed, or it could erode its capacity to fulfill its mission in the future. And this is where some lessons from the past may help you avoid mistakes we've made and may help you figure out your own way forward. It's always, I know you cannot read this, I'll guide you. It is always a good idea to keep an eye on the fiscal framework. Un cadre fiscal est un système dynamique, un pipeline, avec une entrée, généralement le résultat de mesures de taxation, un flot qui alloue les ressources à différents grands objectifs publics, et une allocation pour le fonctionnement du gouvernement et les programmes administrés par les ministères et agences. La différence entre l'entrée et la sortie est le déficit. Ce diagramme est basé sur le budget de 2024. Les recettes, à l'époque, étaient de l'ordre de 500 milliards, les dépenses un peu plus, et le déficit juste avant les élections était de l'ordre de 50 milliards. Ce flot vous aide à garder à l'esprit que la majorité des dépenses gouvernementales sont des transferts à d'autres gouvernements. Health, equalization, social transfer, child care, or transfer to individuals, elderly benefits, child benefits, EI benefits. So for the sake of simplification and discussion, let's agree that in a period of uncertainty and instability, it is not a very good time to tamper with the social safety net Canadian depends on. So let's leave all of that aside. This is the operating budget of the government. It was in the range of 123 billion at the time of the 2024 budget. This is where austerity measures, let me go back. This is where austerity measures would take place, if that is the decision of the Government of Canada. Now, keep in mind the scale of what you're looking at versus the scale of that domain. Departments run programs of various kinds. Most of them are also transferred to business, transferred to association, transferred to provinces and municipalities for infrastructure, for research, for academic support, and so on. And this is where a program review would take place, if that was the decision of the Government of Canada. Ce système fluctue constamment. On annonce une baisse on élimine une taxe, vos revenus baissent, votre déficit augmente. Vous avez une récession, vos dépenses augmentent. Vous avez de l'inflation, vos dépenses augmentent, votre déficit augmente. Vous annoncez des nouveaux programmes, votre déficit augmente. Il s'agit d'un système dynamique et c'est important de le garder à l'esprit parce que ça aide à prendre de meilleures décisions. Now, when imbalances become significant between the input and the output or the allocation, that's when corrective actions become necessary. So with that as a background, let me bring you back in time. What can we learn from the period 83 to 93? The deficit reached a bit more than 8% of GDP. Just to position yourself, you're in the range of 2.5 or thereabout. This is huge. And the government introduced a number of measures. Expenditure reviews were launched. Between 1983 and 1994, there will be 22 expenditure reduction exercises. Now, that could be a target, and you're familiar with that. You're told, please reduce your budget by 5%. But Treasury Board negotiating labor agreements with no adjustment to your base is a cut. Inflation without adjustment is a cut. Freezing staffing is a cut. Freezing salary is a cut. So in that period of time, there were 22 expenditure reduction exercises. Now, let's learn from that period. Expenditure reviews, spending reviews, or RGS1, RGS2, as you're currently calling them, assume that it is possible to reduce government spending while preserving or maintaining every existing program and services. Now, this has some significant consequences. Austerity measures do not improve service to citizens, they do not increase productivity, and they do not modernize government. Cuts are not savings that result from better practices leading to better results at a lower cost. Elles conduisent généralement à prendre les mauvaises décisions. On coupe ce qui est facile plutôt que ce qui aurait une capacité pérenne. On coupe la formation, la participation à des conférences internationales, des déplacements, des voyages. toutes sortes de mesures qui auraient pour effet d'accélérer le rythme auquel on apprend et bâtir notre capacité d'adaptation. Les plus grands succès de cette période aura été d'introduire des mesures structurelles, une réforme de la taxation TPS, la négociation de l'accord Canada-États-Unis. Ce n'était pas une erreur de le négocier, c'est une erreur de devenir dépendant de cet accord. So, there are lessons to learn. There's a place for austerity measure. There's a place for reducing spending, but it must be done in a way that gives you a sustainable capacity of providing better services, not just an erosion of the fabric of the public sector. Let's zoom to 1994 to 2000. The deficit was better, slightly below 6% of GDP, but the debt had continued to increase during that period. The debt was 70% of GDP. You're in the range of 50-something, so there's room to maneuver. Your predecessor invented a different approach. We had learned that austerity measures were not getting us where we needed to go, so we invented program review. A program review starts from the premise that to reduce government spending in a durable way, it is necessary to make decisions about the role of government in society and to stop some programs and to stop some services. The program review of 1995 eliminated a deficit of 6% of GDP, and that was followed by 12 years of surplus budgets and massive reinvestment in health, in research, in innovation, in infrastructure, and the like. So on the face of it, it was very successful, and indeed it was. The public service can be proud of its contribution to regaining Canada's fiscal sovereignty. But there's more we can learn from this period of time. The need for a program review on that scale reveals, in fact, a failure. The failure to reallocate resources on an ongoing basis. It is disruptive. 50,000 people were directly affected, and everybody else indirectly. It is time-consuming. It dominated the government agenda during most of Prime Minister Chrétien's first term in office. So, learning from the past doesn't mean replicating it. It means drawing lessons from it so that you can invent a better way forward. Des avenues s'offrent à vous qui n'existaient pas auparavant. Il est possible, j'en suis persuadée, d'inventer, de mettre en place une approche qui permettrait de réallouer et de redéployer des ressources de façon continue, un exploit que vos prédécesseurs, moi inclus, n'ont pas réussi à accomplir. So your search for a better way could begin by expanding the range of options open to you. And in fact, the broader the scope, the better. There will be time to cut down your list to where you will decide to focus in the end. But first, my advice would be go broad, go wide, and build a longer list. I will just give you three examples to illustrate my point. Commitments, or outstanding commitments. Un nouveau gouvernement est parfaitement justifié de réexaminer les promesses qui ont été faites juste avant et pendant la campagne électorale. Certaines initiatives peuvent être reportées, échelonnées sur une plus longue période ou carrément annulées. Il pourrait y avoir de meilleures façons d'obtenir les objectifs visés et à moindre coût. Et de plus, je dirais que certains des engagements qui sont pris normalement dans une campagne électorale sont contradictoires. Et donc, revoir ces engagements est de la saine gestion. Il s'agit de réconcilier un engagement à créer de la richesse, de la prospérité, avec un engagement canadien à la solidarité collective, avec une responsabilité fiscale. Et, comme je mentionnais, certains des engagements de tous les partis ont un certain degré de tension et de contradictions. Alors, une possibilité, c'est de revoir les engagements. Une autre possibilité, c'est de revoir les programmes à financement temporaire. I must admit that this is not such a wise practice after all. Over the years, there has been an increasing number of initiatives supported by temporary financing. Familiar to you? Some programs are funded for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. There are sunset programs, repeat sunsetters. They die and come back. I found all kinds of names to describe them. It is really interesting. But fundamentally, the practice distorts the true picture about the size of the deficit. It leaves the impression the deficit is going down, but if you know that you will repeat their funding, it's not a true picture. It puts a premium on announcement, but it leaves to others, like you, the burden of managing the situation when the funding is running out. So a review of programs with temporary funding could have a number of benefits. One, you could look at them and say which one are supporting the government priorities. You're about to find out what they are as they are producing the speech from the throne. Which one could reduce dependency on the US? Which one could help to regain Canada's economic sovereignty? And the others could be phased out. This would be challenging, but it would free resources. Keep in mind that for some departments, temporary financing is in the range of 20 to 30% of their budget. This is huge. What about taxation? And what about tax expenditure? Taxation has not been reviewed since, David would know better than I, since the 1960s. Tax expenditures include tax credit, tax exemption, and the like, have not been reviewed seriously since the mid-1980s. Exposing these measures to the light of day and exposing them to cabinet scrutiny would have a number of benefits. It could help ensure that it is supportive of the government agenda, that they all work in a convergent way, but it could also free more resources than any spending or program review ever could. This is to illustrate the point about give yourself room, give yourself space to replenish government war chest, but also to replenish your own contingency reserve, because you will need flexibility. The list of possibility is much longer than this, but it is for you to identify promising avenues in your respective domain of responsibility. Let's take another angle. Simplifier, simplifier, simplifier. Simplifying the organization of government, the organization of the work, government systems, legislation, regulation, reporting requirements. All these measures could generate significant saving, and on top of that, they would help introduce corrective actions that are necessary in any event. So, again, some example to inspire your thinking. L'expérience nous apprend, enfin c'est mon expérience et au Canada et à l'étranger, qu'un système de gouvernement basé sur la responsabilité ministérielle fonctionne mieux avec un nombre réduit de ministres. Cette décision appartient au premier ministre et on verra quelles seront les décisions dans les prochaines semaines. Mais en plus, un nombre réduit de ministres nous assure que les ministres ont plus de flexibilité, une gamme plus large de responsabilités. Ça permet également de réduire les coûts. When I was clerk, there was about 100 and some departments, crown agencies of all kinds. Today, I find it almost impossible to figure out the exact number. Using Treasury Board number, it tells me that there's about 250. Using other sources, including conflict of interest, répertoire, and so on, it's closer to 300. If I exclude all judiciary appointments, there are 2,000 and more senior people working in agencies, part-time or full-time. And each one of these agencies has a full suite of internal services. It's not obvious that such a proliferation of agency has led to better results for Canadians. Are all these organizations still needed? Could some be consolidated and produce better results? Could some be integrated with line departments and save scarce resources? Une approche possible et flexible serait de demander au sous-ministre responsable dans un portefeuille de travailler de concert avec le ministre pour revoir périodiquement ces agences dans le but explicite d'en réduire le nombre, les coûts et de consolider leurs activités. Another suggestion, and some of them will not be fashionable with everybody. Spending reviews have always focused on departments. Might be worth starting at the top for a change. Coming from a public servant, the following suggestion may lack credibility with political staff and political advisors. But let's at least consider it. Remember, my point is your list of possibility, your range of options should be as broad as possible. There will always be time to be told, no, we're not prepared to look at this one. There was 700 plus exempt staff in December 2024. 60% more than in 2011, and this is 6 times the number in the UK, a unitary state with 68 million people. The explanation for the difference between the UK and Canada is quite simple. The role of exempt staff in the UK is to do what the public service is prohibited from doing. And in Canada, the role has been expanding well beyond that definition. There are reasons to be concerned that this expansion has contributed to an erosion of ministerial authority and in some ways has been undermining cabinet system of government. So I think there is room for reducing the number of exam staff, and above all, there's room to refocus their role on politics. The politics of party unity, working across party line, building House and Senate support, building political alliances with the premiers and First Nations. The savings would not be huge, but the symbolic value would be significant, and the impact would be important. What about central agencies? The growth at the center of government has been disconcerting. Between 2000 and 2024, PCO budget has increased by 250%, Treasury Board by 540%, and Finance by 220%. Now, in the case of Treasury Board, you have to keep in mind that they receive a transfer of responsibility from the Public Service Commission. But behind this growth is an unresolved issue au sujet du rôle du centre et du rôle des ministères. So on that one, drawing from experience in Canada and abroad, I would suggest the following. When the center of government becomes operational, it loses its capacity to stay above the fray. When it becomes transactional, it loses its capacity to be strategic. And when it loses its focus on excellence, it falls behind. Alors, il ne faudrait pas sous-estimer l'importance d'un signal que l'assainissement des finances publiques est une responsabilité collective qui engage la responsabilité des plus puissants comme des nouvelles recrues et des débutants. So in summary, you have a whole host of avenues open to you, and therefore your search for a better way begins by expanding the space of possibility, making room, simplifying, and exploring avenues that were not explored recently by your predecessor. With this, you're now ready to look at what would a review of departmental spending look like. It comes last. You don't start with it, you end with it. When it comes to modernizing government, improving services to Canadians and reducing costs, the heavy lifting in the end will be done by department. Les ministères sont des plateformes de savoir, de production et d'innovation. C'est leur soutien aux initiatives du gouvernement qui retient le plus souvent l'attention. Ce sont les services gouvernementaux qui comptent le plus aux yeux des citoyens et des usagers, et ce sont leurs travaux de recherche qui permettent au gouvernement de prendre des décisions éclairées. The capacity of the public service of Canada to be responsive is not and never was in doubt. Today, when I compare to other countries, it is the service delivery capacity of departments that worries me. It is striking that in a period that saw the most rapid growth in government spending is also the period where the public service was losing the most ground compared to its peers. It's hard on the ego of proud Canadians to think that Canada ranks 6th for e-government in 2003 and 47 today, just between Mongolia and Armenia. The fact that Canada is not keeping with the G7 should be a concern for all of us. Canada, for instance, is the only G7 country without a unified web signing system, which is essential for citizen-centered services and for driving costs down. The government agenda and the public service reform agenda must converge and reinform each other. A technologically and digitally advanced public sector is necessary to support a modern, technologically and digitally advanced economy and society. In the mid-1990s, the public service was asked to help the government of Canada regain its fiscal sovereignty. In 2025, the public service is asked to help Canada regain its economic sovereignty and to address issues that bedeviled us in the past. Alors, à quoi pourrait ressembler une revue des dépenses des ministères qui tiendrait compte des leçons du passé et des circonstances particulières de cette période? Elle pourrait être axée sur les services aux citoyens, aux Canadiens, aux usagers. A review center on service to citizens and users could start anytime around the management table in a conversation about what is the most fundamental contribution of a department, a program, a service, a unit to Canada and Canadians going forward. Modernizing government and improving services does not start by focusing on cuts. It starts by focusing on what needs to be preserved. This means preserving the critical knowledge and the critical public assets to make decisions of critical importance for Canada. The complex issues and existential threats that we are not discussing today will not go away because the world is in the middle of a self-inflicted trade crisis. The public service must build and have access to the knowledge base to serve the public interest in yet unknown circumstances. Les connaissances scientifiques, les connaissances démographiques, les connaissances sur les risques permettent de prendre des décisions éclairées et de protéger le public. Critical public assets take years to build and can be destroyed in a few days. And the US is currently providing us a powerful example of what not to do as they are dismantling the National Oceanographic Service or cutting half of the NASA science funding. Knowing what to protect brings greater clarity to what can be stopped. But I would add what can be stopped with pride. This step is of critical importance. Programs and services don't come to an end because they are somewhat deficient or wanting. They come to an end because they have fulfilled their mission and because government have more pressing needs. So either way, they have fulfilled their mission. The situation you're facing in 2025 offers an unprecedented opportunity to reallocate resources, make progress, and minimize disruption. That was not always the case. La fonction publique aura en même temps, de façon simultanée, des zones de croissance rapide et des zones qui seront exposées à une décroissance rapide. The growth in defense, border management, Arctic security, or trade can be used to ease the transition in area where downsizing will be needed, or for a program that will be closed. Working as a team, reallocation can be facilitated by a number of extremely simple measures. Long lead time before funding runs out for some program would offer employees the time to explore new career opportunities. Open competition for staffing vacant positions. Open the possibility of redeploying employees without unnecessary layoff. It is not beyond your imagination to design an approach that would make it possible to reallocate resources and build a capacity to adapt to fast-changing needs and circumstances. This would be a significant achievement, and in fact, a necessary adjustment going forward, because the pace of change is not going to slow down. So comes a time where we have to learn to break out of the boom and bust approach that we've used to budgeting in Canada and in other countries, to an approach that builds the adaptive capacity of government and the public sector. Serving is a process of invention. And every program would benefit from time to time from some serious rethinking. On peut reconceptualiser la gestion des passeports, les demandes d'asile, les octrois de visa. Il n'y a rien qui empêche de standardiser les systèmes administratifs, qu'il s'agisse d'accès à l'information, de recherche de données ou de traduction. But connecting the governing agenda and the reform agenda, high public services provide a country with comparative advantages to attract investment. And this will be particularly important in the coming years. So, what can you do for Canada to be recognized as a country where it is easy to do business? What can be done quickly to provide frictionless services to Canadians at a time of high anxiety and high insecurity? In 2025, technology is on your side, and that was not the case in the 1980s or the mid-1990s. So today, it is possible to accelerate a technological transition in government, in the economy, and in society. So the solution that you're looking for reducing the footprint of the government in society, but doing it responsively, is probably not a death by 1,000 cut, as we did in the 1980s, and it is not through a drastic contraction on the scale of what was done in the 1990s. Your challenge is to do more in some areas, less in others, reallocate resources, and reinvest to modernize both government and society. Les services aux Canadiens est le centre de gravité d'une fonction publique performante qui est adaptée aux besoins de l'avenir. So time to wrap up. At the scale of the world, Canada is a small miracle. It is an exceptional achievement. It is a modern, democratic, inclusive, peaceful society governed by the rule of law. It has better than most been able to reconcile prosperity, solidarity, and fiscal responsibility. It was and will continue to be a magnet for talent. It is absolutely worth fighting for. So the Canadian economy has underperformed in some ways. Course corrections are needed, but this can be done. Public service is lacking behind in some ways. Course corrections are needed, and this can be done. Regaining Canada's economic sovereignty will be hard. It will take time, and it will inflict a high cost on all citizens, all Canadians. There's no denying. But as challenging as the circumstances might be, it provides an opportunity to shape an ambitious governing agenda and a powerful reform agenda to set Canada and the public service on a better trajectory for the future. This chapter belongs to you, she says with envy. So in closing, here is my 2 cents worth of wisdom acquired over a lifetime of public service reforms in Canada and abroad. At the end of the day, it's about you. The way you think has a direct impact on the solutions that will be found and the results that will be achieved. What can you do to make things better from where you are at this time, in the position you hold, with the authority granted to you and the resources available to you, and nothing else? What powerful ideas can you bring forward as part of a collective effort to put Canada and the public service of Canada on a better trajectory? So, do not ask permission for what you already have the authority to do. Do not wait to be asked, and do not wait for others to go first. Go to the limit of your authority and your capacity to bring about powerful ideas. Et dans quelques années, moins que vous le pensez, vous vous souviendrez avec fierté d'avoir contribué à un effort collectif pour que le Canada soit un des pays, un des rares, à avoir traversé avec succès une période de changement sans précédent. This is hard work, but believe me, there is pride and energy in having the chance of writing a new page in the history of one's country. So, as a wise person once said, there are no windows of opportunity for people who have nothing to propose. Thank you all.
Wow. Merci, Madame Bourgon. We've just heard a really compelling call to action and a reminder that in this period of uncertainty and transition, we as public servants have both the opportunity and the responsibility to really shape what comes next. And what I really like is the sense that this potential for reinvention is really real, and the work that we do now will help set the course for Canada's future. All right, on va passer maintenant au panel de discussion où nous allons justement poursuivre la réflexion et approfondir les thèmes abordés dans la présentation de Madame Bourgon. So we're honored to welcome a distinguished group of panelists who bring a wide range of insights and expertise to the table. And together, their contributions will greatly enrich the conversation, particularly as we delve into the challenges and opportunities surrounding public service reform. And I have no doubt it's going to be a lively and thought-provoking discussion. Donc, pour nous guider dans cette conversation, veuillez vous joindre à moi pour accueillir tout d'abord notre modérateur. Donc, en tant que président de l'École de la fonction publique du Canada et fort d'une longue carrière en politique publique au sein du gouvernement fédéral, Taiki Sarantakis apporte une richesse d'idées et d'expériences à cette discussion. Veuillez vous joindre à moi pour lui souhaiter la bienvenue sur scène. We're also truly honored to have David Dodge with us today. As a retired Deputy Minister of Finance and former Governor of the Bank of Canada and one of the country's most respected economic leaders, David has played a pivotal role in shaping both national and international financial policy. Et avec une carrière si distinguée, ses perspectives apporteront sans aucun doute une précieuse profondeur à la discussion. Je vous invite à vous joindre à moi pour lui souhaiter la bienvenue. We are also delighted to welcome Jonathan Freed to today's panel, a highly respected voice in international trade and diplomacy. Jonathan brings decades of experience from some of Canada's most senior economic and diplomatic roles, including serving as Canada's ambassador to the World Trade Organization and the Prime Minister's representative to the G20. Plus récemment, l'empereur du Japon lui a décerné l'Ordre du Soleil Levant, témoignant d'un hommage à son influence durable dans le domaine des affaires internationales. Jonathan Freed. Et bien sûr, ce panel ne serait pas complet sans la voix qui a contribué à façonner la conversation d'aujourd'hui dès le début. Je vous invite à vous joindre à moi pour souhaiter à nouveau la bienvenue à la mère de Francis Bilodeau.
So welcome. So we're going to have a little conversation, and we're going to kind of a little bit link the past with the present, but more importantly with the future. And we're here with three distinguished guests who have contributed enormously to Canada's public policy over the last generation. And we're going to kick off, I'm going to kick off with David, because I think what I'm taking away from Jocelyne's talk was we are at a moment. And this moment, we're at a moment both as a country and we're at a moment as a public service. And we've had different moments before, whether those were GST, whether those were NAFTA, whether those were the free trade agreement, whether it was after 9/11 and the security world, which we'll talk about a little bit. How do you see this moment being kind of similar or different from some of our previous moments?
Well, the world is different, as Jocelyne has said. The world is different, so the constraints on what you can do from the outside are very different. We no longer are in a sweep of history which is favorable to small open economies. We're in a sweep of history where small open economies like ours are going to struggle. So that is different than was the case before. But what is the same in many ways is that the objective of government is to prepare, to provide a framework that real incomes of Canadians over time will grow. That, as whether you express that as opportunity or simply GDP growth, that growth is absolutely critical to us as a country and to us as individuals. And so the new government, as it comes in, will have to focus on this, not to the exclusion of worrying about distribution or stability in our society, but it really now has to be the prime focus because, as Jocelyne has pointed out, we have slid quite seriously, in particular in this 21st century, and since the great financial crisis in 2008, we have been on a downward path. And we all need the opportunity of growth. So that ends being the focus, and that means changing the focus in what you do and what you think about as to what can indeed lead us to doing things in new ways, in better ways, in more efficient ways, in essence, in raising our productivity as a contributor, and in what we do, very importantly, raising the private sector's ability to contribute and the private sector's willingness to save and invest to promote that growth which will benefit citizens. So that, to me, is the fundamental challenge which we face going forward. In that sense, that's not new, but we have a world around us which is less favorable, and that will require your imagination in terms of how we deal with the old problems in new ways to raise our productivity, raise our standard of living, and raise our collective satisfaction with our country.
Thank you. Now, Jonathan, one of the things that David mentioned is that effectively the environment is different, and the environment's always different, but it's particularly different to our neighbors in the South. And you have spent, over the course of your career, a lot of time interfacing with the United States of America on issues like trade, on investment, on liberalization. Tell us a little bit what you see today vis-a-vis the United States and kind of the United States that we kind of grew up with, at least intellectually, in this room.
Well, one can carry on for quite a long time, which I won't. To note that the United States, throughout its history, has had an isolationist trend, a continentalist view, and a mercantilist view. Those trends have come to the fore and consolidated around President Trump and his immediate circle of friends, notwithstanding the remarkable benefits to the United States public, consumers, and business from positive engagement with the world. That's not unfamiliar to us. In fact, getting to the original free trade agreement in 1988 required Canada to be the advocate, required us to put forward the creative ideas, back to being inventive and creative, as the clerk had highlighted. So too, evolving into a modernized and expanded NAFTA, and what some people call NAFTA 0.8, the half step backwards we might have taken in agreeing to the CUSMA terms of reference, which has also served both American and Canadian interests well. As again, our lecturer pointed out, you're not in a position to anticipate going back to anything. The environment will be with us for quite some time, and thus one needs to navigate. Having said that, there are not adversarial or warlike tendencies between our two countries when you take the overall relationship that outlasts any administration, beyond a trade agreement. When you add up all the interconnections, be it electricity grids to transportation, to the Great Lakes, to our cross-border rivers, to managing our respective fisheries on each coast, to the Arctic, we have common cause, we have common interests in security, of the security of North America, the security of our Atlantic and Pacific and Arctic frontiers. That goes back to World War II. That goes back to the Hyde Park Declaration, which led to the Defense Production and Defense Development Sharing Agreements. We are part not only of that military view of security, but also, as the Defense Production Agreements show, and as today's world reminds us, economic security is part of national security. We have the resources, the critical materials, the energy, the potash that feeds American farmers that are essential to American well-being and American ability to defend. So a dialogue, as the Prime Minister is suggesting, about the economy and security being intertwined is a logical framing of the issues. Now, is that one table? Is it an early agreement? Is it several pieces of dialogue that will need to unfold over time with the difficulties and disruptions that we'll have to face in adjusting to that? Probably the latter. And that doesn't preclude the sovereign autonomy of taking advantage of chewing gum and walking at the same time by diversifying and exploring opportunities with our other partners around the world.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of other partners around the world, Madame Bourgon, in addition to being Francis's mother, most people in this room know you as the clerk of the Privy Council, but you've spent a lot of time. You're actually a gem in the world of international public administration. Talk to us a little bit about some of the other countries that you've looked at, how they've been navigating a little bit of this period. Maybe talk to us about a few that you particularly find, not so much as this is what Canada should do, but kind of the mindset that they have adopted in navigating their own challenges.
Taki, I'll get to that in a minute. But building on what my friend said, you know what bugs me? I mean, the world was positioned to have a soft landing, right? The struggle with inflation. The world was positioned to have a reasonably decent period of growth. We had, therefore, an opportunity to focus on the real stuff, issues of climate change that I mentioned, the world getting smaller, massive migration, an aging population that is undoing the economic engine in some countries, and so on and so forth. And instead of dealing with the important, we're dealing with this artificial crisis that is totally self-inflicted. It bugs me. Okay, now that I
feel better now?
That I feel better. Now that I feel better, but I'm still connected to the conversation. I do work with a portfolio of countries. And some of them for many, many years. You came to join me at my last trip in Singapore. I've been working with them for 30 years. I've been working with Denmark for 25, for Finland for 20. I've been regularly working with France or the Great Britain and so on. There are places in the world where I go to learn what not to do. I won't mention them. But the country I just mentioned, sometimes the reaction of Canadians is, oh, but they are so small. What can we possibly learn from them? That is so narrow, and this is so dangerous as a mindset, because a good idea is a good idea is a good idea that you can pick anywhere, at any level, anytime, any place. And the key is to capture it and reinvent it in your context. So there are countries that have dealt with the technological transition that I talked about 25 years ago they started. There are countries that have redesigned their social safety net to be more adapted to current circumstances. There are some that are better positioned today because of the investments they've made. So on that front, what do I see? I see a mix. And it's not related to size, and it's not related to geography. It is many times related to a group of people. I'm struck as I get older. Behind any major reform, you find half a dozen people who bring it about. And it doesn't matter where in the world that is. At the end of the day, you have institutional capacity, but a nexus of people driving a change is behind most significant reform. So what do I pick from the world? That don't underestimate the importance of people. Building the institution does matter. It makes a world of difference. But then the magic is brought together by a group of people who drive an agenda. They often start with, there has to be a better way. Not that they know what is the better way, but the acknowledgement that there has to be a better way. And then the conversations start. And then they are looking elsewhere. And then they are capturing ID. And then they are reinventing. And guess what? They try. There are countries that write the most beautiful papers. What is the issue? What's the background? What is the academic underpinnings of it? And there are countries that have pilot project and results. And Canada is not always balanced between the two. We have a tendency to write phenomenal papers, but we're not always driving the change process as fast as we could. And yet, there are times where Canada, no one can beat Canada in some cases. When the alignment of political will and professional capacity comes together, it's amazing what can be achieved.
Now, David, there's a story. You came home one day, or you came to work one day, and you said, "I have found my successor as governor of the Bank of Canada." And the person that you found as your successor as the governor of the Bank of Canada is today our Prime Minister. Now, there are some people in this room who are deputy ministers who will be briefing your successor at the Bank of Canada. Tell us a little bit about what you would tell your successor today. I know you're on record. In March, you wrote a piece on how we're kind of over-consuming in Canada, how we're going to have to go through some choices, some difficult choices. Talk to us a little bit about how you would frame some of those difficult choices.
That's exactly right, and I think Mr. Carney,
Prime Minister Carney.
Prime Minister Carney. I keep wanting to say Mark, but I can't do that anymore. I think he grasped this absolutely, that those changes have to come, that those are going to be difficult, that we have to build, and to build we have to invest. And so I think in addressing him as you work through the particular issues for which you are responsible, thinking through what it is that you can bring forward that fits this drive, if you will, to invest, to raise productivity, to raise our contribution in the future, and think through also what it is that you can do in your perspective to engage the private sector in this enterprise. Because after all, most of the investment that's going to have to be made going forward is not going to be made by the public, we're making some, but is going to be made by the private sector. And so what is it in the rules that you're writing, in the programs that you're administering, what is it that you can do which will actually improve the private sector's ability to make that contribution, to give it the incentive to make that contribution, and to remove disincentives that may currently be there. So in addressing the Prime Minister, I think it's really important to bear that thinking in mind as you bring forward your ideas related to the areas for which you are responsible.
Jonathan, how would you frame advice to Prime Minister Carney in the areas which you're knowledgeable about?
Well, I disagree with your premise. I may not be knowledgeable. I'm a student of both the former governor and the former
That's very hurtful of you, by the way, of disagreeing with the premise.
Look, as David said, growth is essential. We're a country of only 40 million people with the capacity and the demonstrated ability to produce for many more than that. We are very dependent on engagement internationally to have markets, but also, as motivated our move to free trade, as the MacDonald Commission advised us in the 80s, to open ourselves to the best of the world and to increase our productivity through competition at home. So whether we're open to the United States only? No. Are we open to the world? Yes, as the only G7 country who has free trade with every continent, with the comprehensive agreement with the European Union, with the 22 countries or so of the, you got to learn to say it, it's going to be common, CPTPP. In Asia, our negotiations with Indonesia and ASEAN, who matter in economic terms, put aside the small geographic size. We need to take advantage, both inward and outward. Those are huge sources of capital as well. That puts a premium on acting at home to be the most hospitable environment for legitimate and productive investment, while caring about our economic security. You don't want your adversaries to be owning your critical minerals. You don't want to be loose on cybersecurity or on technology terms. That's not just following the United States. That's a common Western interest in securing our economic future, as well as the more traditional intelligence and defense environment. So embrace that as proactively as you can. But governments, remember, create the playing field, hopefully rules-based for the world -1, or China -2, Russia -3, but it's the private sector that needs to act on that. We may need to up our game and lead them by hand to get off their complacency and be more risk-taking in looking for those opportunities in other markets. Final word on this, it's not just about trade within the confines of traditional trade agreements. It's trade, investment, it's portfolio investment, and it's the infrastructure around that as financial services and capital flows open. Do we have double taxation agreements in line with that? And so on. So one needs a more comprehensive economic view that doesn't just belong to the trade commissioners and global affairs. It belongs to finance. It belongs to transport. Do we have air links, sea links, and so on? And we care about the environment. Is it clean trade? So it's multidisciplinary, it's federal, provincial, and it's multi-stakeholder. One last word, because it's a wonderful turn of phrase. Mike Froman, the former USTR and White House advisor, who now heads the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations, in looking at our transition from a G1 to what is a multipolar world emerging of however many poles you may wish to count, said it behooves all of us to be polyamorous. Not that we need permanent friends on multiple fronts, but our interests are permanent, and we should embrace every opportunity where it can be found.
That's interesting. I'm going to quote a former colleague of yours, Richard Discerny, the late Richard Discerny, they called the public service serial monogamists. So between polyamorous and serial monogamous, somewhere in there is Canada. Now, Madame Bourgon, between the public service and the political class, significant things are going to have to happen for better or worse in the coming years, and probably sooner rather than later. One of the things, though, in that environment, Edelman keeps track of trust scores over long periods of time. And in particular, it looks at 4 institutions in Canada: the media, the government, business, and NGOs. And this is Canada. So obviously the number 1 trusted institution of those 4 is wrong. The number 1 most trusted institution is business. That's surprising. The least trusted of those 4 institutions, and again, this is Canada, is obvious. It's government. So we are now in a world where we, collectively, and our political masters, are trusted by Canadians less than they trust the media, less than they trust business, and less than they trust NGOs. So we have, in addition to all of these other things that you articulated, we also have kind of a trust gap, a credibility gap. How are we going to start to overcome that? How are we going to do big things if we collectively are not as trusted as we think we are?
I would say, yes, it is about growth. but it's about people. And growth without a form of balance where people feel that they benefit from it and that their hard work in contributing to a well-performing economy is rewarded, leads to the kind of polarized situation we have in the US. And Canada, that's what I meant when I said Canada had a bit of a genius in balancing economic prosperity, solidarity, and fiscal responsibility. And this balance is never stable, forever changing, but gee, we have to keep our eye on that. I think we need to bring some course correction to the perception of the private sector with all the respect I have for my colleagues in the private sector. Look, the reason we are dependent to 75% of all of our export to one market has something to do with the way the private sector has performed. The word complacency that you use is totally appropriate in my mind. And it was not a lack of incentive by government to encourage research and development and investment in modern technology. It was not lacking, but it did not happen. So I think we need to speak out a bit more about what is done, who's doing it, who's doing the heavy lifting, and what do we need to do differently? Because I really think we need to do differently. The notion that you just have to cut taxes and deregulate and everything will be fine, if only you leave it to the market, I don't think is the way forward. It was never the way to build Canada, but it's certainly not the way forward. So I think there's some explaining there that needs to be done. I'm not saying government is perfect. I was the first one today here listing all kind of weaknesses we have. So being clear-minded is not only about our performance, it's about the performance of others. A strong partnership requires partners that speak to each other about what they see on the other side and course corrections that would be needed.
David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, but the government writes the rules in which the private sector performs. And those rules can constrain or they can encourage innovation. And I would say that the view out there in the private sector at the moment is that the effort has been more on the constraint than the encouragement. And I think it's really important that we turn that around, in what we do, but I would say more importantly, in how you do it. In that you have the chance in your day-to-day business life to have that interaction, that open interaction with the private sector people, and to encourage that so that there is that dialogue at the time of rule writing that you bring to the writing of those rules. You bring an understanding of what may work or work better in encouraging innovation on the other side. So I think this is a partnership. It's a partnership between the public and private sector. And we should never forget that. Unfortunately, sometimes people in the private sector forget that as well. But I think it's important that we on the public side really remember that and do our best to remain open and to encourage that dialogue in our day-to-day work. And that dialogue, indeed, will contribute to trust. And so it's up to us all to try build that. And I think that is an important way forward.
I think the rules have to be encouraging. But I suspect that it will also take a bit of a push. Governments need a push to course correct when we're falling behind. And the private sector needs a bit of a push when the level of dynamism and energy is not what is needed for the time. So maybe an openness to doing rules that encourage, combined with frank exchange both ways and a bit of a push for each other would build a stronger partnership.
And Mr. Carney will give some of that.
The one thing we did not talk about and should be on everybody's radar screen is unity. The one thing that could derail many of the initiative is the fragility, if fragility emerge on that front. So my advice to everybody in the public service is don't lose sight of national unity. It is a conditions for progress on many of the aspects we talked about.
Now, sadly, we have to wrap up because we're not only at time, we're over time. But Madame Bourgon, not just today, but in the DM Reflections video you were kind enough to do at the school, you kind of enumerated a bunch of problems, and then you ended with, and I envy the fact that you're here to deal with them, and I'm kind of sad that I'm not here to help deal in this environment. Talk to us a little bit about why you envy the people in this room and why you envy some of the people online who have heard your speak today.
I don't envy, I'm here. And anybody who wants, I'm available and accessible and always willing to share ideas and so on. So I don't feel separate from your journey. I am a deep believer in the importance of the role of the state. I've done enough work in enough places to know that you don't have a well-performing country without a well-performing government and well-performing public institutions. This is not taking anything away from the importance of private organization or civil society. But countries that don't have that have tremendous difficulty in dealing with problems and making progress. So I'm on that side. Count me as a believer of the importance of the role of the state. But it's in intense period of change that it's most exciting. If you believe it's possible to build a better future, if you believe it's possible to solve problems, if you believe it's possible to invent solutions, I use the sentence, when things are getting unstuck, this is the ideal space for innovation, right? And someone somewhere is in the process of inventing something of great significance, right? And it could be us. And it is us. So that's what I mean when I say I will never be far from the public sector. I'll never be far from the role of the state. I'll never be far from public administration and the people who care about leading major reforms.
Absolutely. On behalf of the people in this room and the people online, I would like to thank all three of you for this wonderful discussion, but in particular, Madame Bourgon, for your 2025 lecture on what we need to do in 2025, serving in 2025 and beyond. Please join me in thanking our panel.
So I would like to echo Taiki's thanks again on behalf of myself and those of us joining today, for our esteemed panelists, our honorable speaker, and I want to thank the audience today for making the time to be here. Nous sommes vraiment reconnaissants que vous ayez pris le temps d'être avec nous cet après-midi et en espérant que cette discussion se poursuive au-delà de cet événement. Donc, merci encore à toutes et à tous et je vous souhaite une très belle fin de journée. Merci.